So, we tend to think of time as, well, as this constant ticking away the same for everyone, right?
Yeah, absolutely, like a universal clock.
But have you ever stopped to think about how differently we actually experience it, especially like in a city?
Uh-huh. The rhythms are just different depending on who you are, what you do.
Exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive into some really fascinating ideas around this. We've got a PhD thesis that properly digs into how time is socially constructed.
Right, and we're pairing that with some pretty powerful insights from Marx on political economy and, well, capitalism.
And what's really interesting, I think, is how these different viewpoints, they light each other up, don't they?
They really do. This thesis, Lisa Bradley's from 2015, it really challenges that idea of time as just this neutral thing we measure.
And then you put it next to Marx.
Yeah, and Marx, I mean, he's focused on economics, obviously, but his whole analysis operates within a certain framework of time, a very specific one, actually.
Right.
And you start seeing these surprising links about how our cities, our whole urban world is shaped by this.
Okay, so our mission today really is to unpack how this dominant idea of time, the clock time, the schedules, does way more than just organize our day.
Right. It actually influences the very fabric of our cities, our social setups, even how we understand economic systems.
We spend so much energy mapping cities in space, right? Where things are,
Uh-huh.
the geography of it all. It makes you wonder what happens when we start thinking about their temporal landscapes.
And that's a key idea from Bradley's thesis that really jumped out at me. This parallel she draws between space and time.
Go on.
Well, we've kind of moved beyond thinking of space as just coordinates on a map. We talk about lived space, experience space.
Those feel different, yeah.
Exactly. And the thesis argues we need a similar shift for time. It's not just seconds ticking by uniformly. It has a qualitative side.
Meaning?
Meaning it feels different, it is different for different people, and that really impacts their needs, their lives.
Okay, let's dive into that a bit more then. This social construction of time. The thesis basically says time isn't just out there. It's something we, like, collectively build and agree on.
Precisely. Bradley's work hits this head on. Time isn't just neutral, objective. And this isn't just, abstract philosophy.
Yeah.
No, she argues it has real, tangible political consequences, especially when you look at how cities work, or maybe how they don't work for everyone.
Okay, here's where it gets really thought-provoking for me. The thesis suggests urban studies because it focuses so much on the spatial side of things.
Where buildings are, transport links, that kind of thing.
Right. It's maybe missed the boat on how incredibly diverse people's experiences of time actually are within the city.
Yes. And this oversight, the thesis argues, can end up marginalizing people. People whose experience of time just doesn't fit the standard dominant mold.
You've got it. There's a great line in the thesis. Where temporal questions are not posed, answers are unlikely to return temporal findings.
That nails it, doesn't it? If you're only looking at cities through a spatial lens, you're missing this huge dimension of how people live, how they navigate their days, their weeks.
Especially those whose lives don't run on a typical 9 to 5, maybe.
Exactly. Or just anyone whose rhythm doesn't quite match the relentless pace of a tightly scheduled city.
So by not really paying attention to these different temporal experiences, urban planning or policy might accidentally, or maybe not so accidentally, contribute to what the thesis calls othering. What does that mean here?
Well, think about it. If a city's main rhythm is set by, say, standard business hours,
Monday to Friday, 9 to 5.
right, then people whose lives operate outside that shift, workers, caregivers, maybe artists, students, the unemployed, they can get pushed to the margins.
Wow, so
Their needs might not be met. Think about accessing services, childcare, even just feeling safe or connected in public spaces at different times. Their different time kind of marks them as outside the norm, the other.
the thesis then brings in this really cool idea, a collage of time. What's that about?
So in Chapter 2, it lays out this whole range of different ways time is lived and understood. It's not just clock time.
Like what?
Well, the thesis mentions things like newer time, where maybe social events dictate the schedule, not the clock, or queer time, which can sort of resist those linear expectations about life stages, or Sabbath time, with its own unique feel and rules.
Yeah.
Even just the difference between how a child experiences time versus an adult.
Right, time flies or drags.
Exactly. So by showing this collage, The thesis highlights just how varied time is. It's constructed differently across cultures, communities, life phases.
And seeing that collage, it challenges the idea that cities can just run on one-time setting.
Absolutely. It pushes back against that one-size-fits-all model.
Yeah.
Recognizing this variety could lead to, fairer ways of distributing resources or providing services. It's about equity, really.
It seems like because one specific version of time, this Western linear clock-based time, is so dominant,
It's become the default, yeah.
it actually makes it hard for people to even talk about these other ways of experiencing time. It doesn't fit the common language.
That's a really key point the thesis makes.
Yeah.
This dominance creates what it calls a normative hegemony of time.
Oh, what?
A normative hegemony. Basically, one way of doing time becomes the way, the normal way.
Like the 9 to 5 you mentioned.
Exactly. That becomes the benchmark. Anything outside it might be seen as, I don't know, inefficient, maybe even lazy or disruptive, even though loads of people's lives just don't fit that neat box.
And that makes it difficult to even plan for or accommodate these other realities.
Very difficult. How do you argue for needs based on a temporal rhythm that the dominant system doesn't even really recognize?
Yeah. Building on that, the thesis argues this lack of focus on time in urban studies isn't just like an accident or an oversight.
No, it suggests it actually helps maintain that dominant temporal reality.
How?
Well, by not critically examining temporal difference, by not asking those temporal questions, urban studies can inadvertently prop up the existing power structures that often benefit from a standardized, predictable, clock-driven society.
And this connects to the thesis's bigger concerns about social justice in the city, right? How does our view of time link to urban inequality?
Yeah, the thesis is really focused on how difference gets managed or ordered in the city. And that includes temporal difference.
Okay.
When certain ways of using time, certain rhythms, are prioritized, think about infrastructure planning, service hours, even just social norms, it can disadvantage or exclude those who operate differently.
Making their needs kind of invisible.
Exactly. Their experiences get sidelined in planning and policy. Think about, say, a single parent working 2 jobs with unpredictable hours. Their temporal reality is vastly different from a salaried office worker.
Yeah, and accessing things like childcare or even just decent public transport at odd hours can be a massive challenge. That seems like a very concrete example of this temporal othering.
It absolutely is.
The thesis also points out some cracks in how urban studies usually does things. What are the main issues it flags?
It highlights 3 main things, really. First, this tendency to naturalize time in cities. We just accept clock time as normal, as a given, not as a social construct with its own built-in norms and biases.
We don't question it.
We don't. Second, and this is kind of surprising, she argues there's been a decline in using time and temporality as active analytical tools within urban studies itself. It's fallen off the radar a bit. And third, the way urban knowledge often gets produced actually reinforces this naturalization. It tends to marginalize those alternative temporal accounts, the stories from the edges.
Okay, so we've got this idea. Time is constructed, it impacts city life, it has justice implications, and maybe urban studies hasn't fully grappled with it.
That's the core argument, yeah.
Right. This is really making me rethink things. Okay, let's shift focus slightly and bring in Marx. Now, he wasn't writing directly about the social construction of time like Bradley is.
No, not in the same terms.
Yeah.
His focus was squarely on political economy, on capital.
But his work definitely seems to operate with some, let's say, underlying assumptions about time.
Oh, absolutely. Time is crucial to his analysis, even if it's not the headline topic. Think about his critique of Hegel, for instance. Well, Hegel had this idea that contradictions sort of resolve themselves into a higher unity, right? Marx pushed back hard. He said, no, these are essential contradictions within the system itself. They don't just disappear.
And how does that relate to time?
Well, it suggests that dominant ways of thinking like Hegel's dialectic, or perhaps like a dominant abstract view of time, can mask these fundamental tensions and conflicting realities.
So a seemingly unified concept like clock time might actually hide deep conflicts in how different people experience it.
Exactly. It smooths over the cracks, you could say.
The Marx excerpts also mention his view on religion, the inverted world consciousness, the opium of the people. What's the connection there?
Marx saw religion as kind of a distorted reflection of a flawed material world. It offered comfort and illusory escapes, maybe?
An inverted consciousness because it looked for solutions elsewhere, not in fixing the real world.
Pretty much. And you can draw a parallel here. A socially constructed reality, like our dominant way of understanding time, can also shape our perceptions, maybe even offer a sort of escape from acknowledging the messy, conflicting temporal realities of daily life under certain systems.
Okay, and what about the commodity form? Marx's analysis of that seems relevant too.
Definitely. Marx argued that when labor becomes a commodity, its social nature gets obscured.
How so?
It starts to look like an objective feature of the product rather than the result of human relationships, human work, human time.
Okay, so the social effort, the time spent, it gets hidden inside the thing being sold.
Right. And this is similar, isn't it, to how our dominant idea of abstract time can hide the social processes, the power dynamics, that actually shape our temporal experiences. It presents time as just this neutral measurement, hiding the messy reality underneath.
Let's get deeper into Marx on capitalism and production. The excerpts from Capital really stress that under capitalism, capital doesn't just grab surplus value, it actively produces it.
Yes, this is absolutely critical. It's not just about merchants buying cheap and selling dear. Capitalism revolutionizes production itself.
And that involves time.
Fundamentally, the whole system is geared towards organizing and measuring labor time in a way that generates more value than the labor itself costs, surplus value. This requires a very specific understanding of time, linear, divisible, measurable, abstract.
The excerpts point out that Marx deliberately starts Capital Volume 1 with production. Why there?
Because for Marx, the production process is the engine room. It's where value and surplus value are created. It's where capital itself is born and reborn. And it's where that core antagonistic relationship between wage labor and capital is constantly reproduced.
So understanding production is key to understanding everything else, the politics, the social stuff.
That was his argument.
Mhm.
And central to that production process is the control and exploitation of labor time.
And this setup creates a basic power imbalance, right, between capitalists and workers, specifically around time.
Absolutely. The excerpts touch on this institutional inequality. Capitalists own the means of production. They aren't typically forced to buy labor power constantly just to survive.
They have choices. They can wait.
Exactly. Workers generally don't have that luxury. If you don't own the tools of the factory, you're usually under economic pressure to sell your ability to work, your time, pretty continuously.
And that dependency shapes your whole experience of time in that system.
Profoundly. Your time isn't really your own in the same way. It's dictated by the demands of production, the need to earn a wage.
Now, the political theory excerpts offer a Marxist critique of capitalist industrialization. What's their take on time in that context, and what's the alternative they suggest?
Well, they critique how capitalism turns labor, human effort and time, into just an abstract quantity, something you can buy and sell per hour, completely detached from the person doing the work.
Leading to alienation.
Yes, alienation from your work, from the product, even from your own time. And this exploitation, they argue, gets masked by money acting as this universal thing that equates all different kinds of labor.
So what's the proposed socialist alternative in terms of time?
The implication is that a socialist model would aim to overcome this. By giving workers more control over the means of production, they'd also gain more control over the labor process itself, and crucially, over their own labor time, moving away from time being just this abstract, exploitable commodity.
Okay, let's bring it back to the thesis again. It talks about using a rhizomatic methodology, drawing on Guattari. Sounds complex. What does that mean here?
Yeah, rhizome is a botanical term, like for ginger root. It spreads underground, sends out shoots in all directions, no single center.
Okay.
Guattari used it as a way to think about systems that are interconnected but not hierarchical. Bradley uses this approach in the thesis to argue we need to see the connections between things that might seem separate,
Like what?
like different ways people experience time, the power structures in a city, ongoing social struggles, language, everything. It's about tracing connections laterally, not just top-down.
The thesis quotes Guattari. Any point of a rhizome can be connected to any other. A rhizome ceaselessly establishes connections.
Exactly. So it's a way of thinking that resists simple cause and effect and looks for complex webs of relationships.
So how does thinking rhizomatically help us imagine different urban futures, ones that are maybe more sensitive to diverse times?
Well, it encourages us to look for those hidden connections, the interdependencies that dominant ways of thinking focused only on space or only on clock time tend to miss.
To see the whole network.
Right. And to pay attention to what the thesis calls those absent facets of urban life, which have no course to argue for their relevance.
Yeah.
That includes people living on different temporal rhythms. It's about making space, conceptually and literally, for that temporal diversity.
Okay. So let's try and wrap this up. The big takeaway seems to be our common understanding of time. It's not just natural or objective.
Definitely not. It's a social construct
Huh.
and a powerful one.
With real political, social, and economic effects, shaping our cities, reinforcing certain power dynamics.
Uh-huh. And Marx, even though he's focused on capital, his analysis really depends on, and maybe even reinforces, a particular way of thinking about and organizing time, especially labor time.
Yeah.
So recognizing that time isn't monolithic, valuing the different ways it's experienced, that seems crucial for any kind of social justice project, especially in cities.
If we stick to just one rigid view of time.
We inevitably end up marginalizing people whose lives, whose needs, whose very existence operates on a different clock, so to speak.
Okay, so here's a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. How might our cities, maybe even our whole society, look different if we genuinely embrace this multiplicity of time?
Yeah, what kinds of alternative social setups or economic arrangements might open up if we move beyond just linear, abstract clock time?
Think about your own relationship with time. How does it feel? How does it maybe differ from the standard 9 to 5 deadline-driven world around you? Really thinking about that might just shift how you see everything.